When we mention the ancient kingdom of Macedon, probably the first person that comes to mind is Alexander the Great, its famed king and perhaps the greatest conqueror in all of history. His people, known as the Macedones or Macedonians, were a tribe that would rise from the fringes of the Hellenic world to one of the greatest powers of the Hellenistic age. In this episode, we talk about their origins and uncover who exactly the Macedonians were. The ancient region of Macedonia was located to the north of Thessaly, beyond Mount Olympus. The regions of Emathia, Botaia, and Pieria served as the core of the Lower Macedonia, which eventually came to incorporate several inland regions of what became known as Upper Macedonia. The ancient kingdom was not mentioned by Homer in the Iliad, who instead wrote that upon passing Mount Olympus to the north, one would reach Pieria and Emathia before arriving to Mount Athos. Indeed, the territory that would become Macedon did not seem to be a part of the Mycenaean Greece of the Bronze Age. Instead, it was inhabited by the early Thracian and Phrygian tribes. The first mention of the Macedonians comes from Hesiod's epic poem known as the Catalogue of Women, dated to as early as the 8th century BCE. There, in his mythical genealogies, the poet tells of a son of Zeus and Phthian princess, Thea, named Macedon, the eponymous founder of the tribe of the Macedones, or Macedonians. According to Hesiod, Thea's other son was Magnes, the eponymous king of the tribe of Magnetis. Her brother Hellen served as the forefather of the tribes of Dorians, Aeolians, Ionians, and Achaeans, while her sisters Pandora and Protogenia created lineage of several other ancient tribes. Either way, Macedonians seem to be present as a tribe at the time of Hesiod at the start of the Archaic period, suggesting that their formation probably took place at some point during the Greek Dark Ages. The ethnonym Macedonis comes from the ancient Greek adjective makednos, meaning tall, believed to have originally meant the highlanders or the tall ones. The first historical accounts of the Macedonian kingdom come from Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE. He asserts that the founder of the Macedonian dynasty was Perdiccas, ruling in the 7th century and descending from the Heraclid king of Argos, Temenus. For that reason, the royal dynasty of Macedon was called the Temenidae after Temenus and Argeadae after the city of Argos. However, according to the later historians as well as the traditions of the Macedonians themselves, there had been several more kings that preceded Perdiccas in Macedon. This also corresponds well with Hesiod's early mention of the Macedonians, which predates the reign of Perdiccas and shows that the ancient writers were aware of Macedon before the 7th century. The ancient tradition has Caranas as the founder of the Macedonian kingdom and of the Argead dynasty. Caranas was said to be a son or a descendant of the Argive king Temenus. Departing Argos to establish his own kingdom, Caranas reportedly consulted the Delphian oracle, who told him to go north, towards the region of Emathia. According to Marsyas of Pella, Caranas also came to Emathia with a large band of Greeks, being instructed by an oracle to seek a home in Macedonia. He seized the city of Edessa, the inhabitants being taken unaware because of heavy rain and dense fog. He gave the city of Edessa the name Aigai and its people the name Argeads in memory of this service. The Hellenic origins and nature of the Macedonians was unquestioned as far as the Macedonians themselves were concerned. However, being on the fringes of the Greek world, their Hellenic nature was sometimes questioned by others, especially those that opposed the growing influence of Macedon, and especially the Athenians. Even some of the modern scholars have used some of these accounts to variously re-examine the degree of the Macedonians' connection to the other Hellenic tribes. When it comes to the ancient authors, conflicting reports had already started with Herodotus. The historian acknowledged the Heraclid lineage of the Macedonian dynasty through Temenus and asserted their close connection to the Dorians when it came to their origins. Herodotus reports that Greeks were called Macedones as they lived in the Pindus mountains, and then subsequently Dorians when they moved to the Peloponnese. However, he also called King Alexander I a Greek who ruled over the Macedonians, and noted that Thessalians were the first of the Hellenes to submit to Xerxes during the Persian invasion, even though Macedonians had already submitted prior to that. Thucydides of Athens likewise seemed to vaguely classify the Macedonians. Describing an expedition of Spartan general Brasidas, Thucydides says the following: "In all, there were about 3,000 Hellenic heavy infantry, accompanied by all the Macedonian cavalry, with the Chalcidians, near 1,000 strong, besides an immense crowd of barbarians." Considering that Chalcidians were also Greeks, many of whose city-states were members of the Delian League led by Athens, it doesn't look like Thucydides specifically meant to say that Macedonians and Chalcidians were not Hellenes, but simply differentiated them from the Peloponnesian troops under Brasidas. Also, Thucydides was an Athenian general who fought against Spartans in the Peloponnesian War. Macedon was among the Spartan allies and thus Thucydides' enemies, making it understandable for an Athenian not to be the fondest of the kingdom of Macedon. He did acknowledge the Argive origins of the Macedonian dynasty and admired the contemporary Macedonian king of the time, Archelaus I. However, not everyone admired Archelaus, especially in Athens. Thrasymachus of Chalcedon, a philosopher who spent his career in Athens, was particularly opposed to the Macedonian ruler and went as far as to call Archelaus a barbarian, the first time a Macedonian was labeled as such. He was famously quoted as saying that Greeks were enslaved to the barbarian Archelaus. In the following decades, as the Athenians opposed the expansion of the Macedonian influence, their attempts to present the Macedonians as less of the Hellenes or even non-Greeks only increased. Athenian statesman Demosthenes held particular resentment towards Macedon and its king Philip II. In his speeches, Demosthenes variously insulted Philip, calling him not only no Greek, nor related to the Greeks, but not even a barbarian from any place that can be named with honor, but a pestilent knave from Macedonia, whence it was never yet possible to buy a decent slave. Demosthenes was no stranger to insulting speech and did not hesitate to publicly use it even against the fellow Athenians. He notably used the word barbarian to label Midias, Demosthenes' rival on the public scene. The term barbarian was originally used for non-Greek speakers during the Archaic period, but by the classical times it increasingly became derogatory, especially when used in the politic context between the Greeks themselves. Grammarian Athenaeus, for example, labeled Thessalians, Boeotians, and Eleans as barbarians, despite being perfectly aware that Thessalians and Boeotians spoke Aeolian Greek dialect, while Eleans, hosts of the Olympic Games themselves, spoke a form of Doric. Likewise, Ionian philosopher Prodicus, who lived in Athens as an ambassador, called the dialect of Pittacus of Mytilene, one of the famed seven sages of Greece and an Aeolian speaker himself, a barbarian, because of Pittacus's difference to the Attic literary style. He did not know to distinguish the words correctly, being from Lesbos and having been raised with a barbarian dialect. It is evident that the Athenians, being perhaps the main center of culture and learning among the classical Greeks, likewise had a sense of cultural superiority over many of the contemporary Hellenes, which often resulted in looking down upon other Greeks who were not Attic or Ionian speakers. When it comes to the Macedonians, who were Hellenic speakers themselves, they gradually abandoned their own dialect in favor of Attic Greek during the 4th century BCE, which was preferred by the Macedonian aristocracy. The original Macedonian dialect itself was attested in several inscriptions, most notably the Palakurs tablet, which reveals a Dorian Greek dialect, specifically a variation of its northwestern form, also spoken in Epirus and Aetolia. This was seemingly confirmed by Titus Livius, better known to us as Livy, in his History of Rome, where he attested that Macedonians, Aetolians, and Acarnanians were all men of the same language. Tragedian Euripides likewise asserted that Macedonians were Hellenes and even went to live at the court of Pella in 408 BCE. Geographer Strabo stated that Macedonia is of course part of Greece, yet now, since I am following the nature and shape of the places geographically, I have chosen to classify it apart from the rest of Greece. Strabo then asserted that Macedonian people are Greeks while discussing the Aetolians. For a very long time, the Aetolians, together with the Acarnanians, stood firm not only against the Macedonians and other Greeks, but also finally against the Romans when fighting for autonomy. Numerous other ancient writers that wrote about the Macedonians never seemed to question their Hellenic ethnicity or heritage, a practice that was rather customary for the Athenians during the height of their negative sentiment towards Macedon. Alexander I of Macedon, likely when he was still a prince in 504 BCE, signed up for the foot race at the Olympic Games, which were exclusive for the Greeks only. After producing proof of his Argive lineage from Temenus, the Olympic judges accepted the Macedonian. His grandson Archelaus also participated in the Olympics as well as the Pythian Games in Delphi, winning the chariot race in both competitions. At least as of the 4th century BCE, non-royal Macedonians variously competed and won the Olympic Games in the subsequent period. During the time of Philip II, Macedonians became members of the Delphic Amphictyonic League, a sacred association which commanded the utmost religious authority among the Greeks. By the time of Philip's son Alexander III, also known as Alexander the Great, Macedonians were already the hegemonic power of the Greek mainland and had set their sights eastwards, towards the Persian Empire. Alexander's conquest of Persia was not only among the greatest military achievements in history, but also served as the beginning of a new historical era, known as the Hellenistic Age. Greek culture, religion, and language was spread across the known world by Alexander and the Macedonian generals that succeeded him and carved his empire amongst themselves. From that point on, a new dialect called Koine or Common Greek rose to prominence and served as the lingua franca of the ancient world. It was based on Attic and Ionic forms mixed with other varieties. At last, it would be none other than the small backwater kingdom from the edge of Greece that brought the Hellenic culture across countless lands to the edges of the known world, making it so impactful and highly regarded that we still live its legacy today.